War is not only fought with guns, tanks, and bombs. It is fought with bread, with fuel, with every bullet carried to the men at the front. In the summer of 1944, the American Army discovered this truth on the roads of France. After the landings in Normandy, after the bitter battles among hedgerows and farm fields, the Allies broke through. Operation Cobra tore open the German lines, and suddenly American troops surged forward like a rising tide. Towns liberated, villages cheering, Patton's Third Army racing east, faster than even Eisenhower had dreamed possible. But there was a shadow to this triumph. The faster the army moved, the further it stretched from its lifeline. Food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, and most precious of all, gasoline. Without them, tanks would grind to a halt, guns would fall silent, soldiers would go hungry. The Germans knew it. They counted on it. They will outrun their supplies. They will choke on their own speed. And yet, the Americans answered with something the Germans never imagined. A supply system born from desperation. A river of trucks flowing without end, day and night. A name that would become legend, painted in bold red circles on windshields and signposts. The Red Ball Express. Picture the roads of Normandy in August 1944. Narrow lanes churned by tanks into mud. Bridges blown apart, replaced by rough wooden spans. Dust rising so thick that drivers could barely see beyond their hoods. Now imagine thousands of trucks. Engines roaring, tires screeching, convoys stretching mile after mile, headlights piercing through night fog. Each truck laden with fuel drums, rations, artillery shells. Each driver knowing that without him, men at the front would starve or die. Most of these drivers were young. Many had never traveled far from home before the war. And a large number were African American soldiers, placed into segregated units. They had been told they were not fit to fight in the front lines. But here, behind the wheel, they carried the weight of the army itself. Every gallon of gasoline they delivered kept Patton's Shermans rolling. Every box of K rations they hauled kept GIs alive another day. Every crate of ammunition meant another German position could be silenced. Meanwhile, the Germans watched. From the hedgerows, from shattered barns, from hidden outposts, they saw the endless stream of trucks. It seemed impossible. How could the Americans move so much so quickly? For the Wehrmacht, supply lines were already strangled. Fuel was scarce, food scarcer. Panzer crews often abandoned their tanks for lack of gasoline. Soldiers scrounged for scraps. But the Americans, the Americans seemed to have rivers of supplies, and the Red Ball Express carried it all. The Germans could not believe it. The roads had become the Allies' greatest weapon. Roads alive with wheels, engines, and determination. But this miracle did not come without cost. The men of the Red Ball Express faced dangers as great as any soldier on the front line. Exhaustion, mechanical failures, German ambushes, rain, mud, and endless hours behind the wheel. Their war was fought not in trenches, but on the open road. The Red Ball Express did not spring fully formed. It was born out of chaos, out of desperate necessity. By late August 1944, Patton's tanks were racing across France faster than maps could be drawn. But the fuel dumps still sat far behind on the beaches of Normandy. Every mile forward meant another mile added to the supply route. Something had to be done, fast. The solution came on August 25, 1944. The U.S. Army created a massive round-the-clock trucking system. Convoys were given priority on certain roads, closed to all civilian and non-essential traffic. The signs painted with a red circle, the ball, told everyone this road belongs to the lifeline. They named it the Red Ball Express. Imagine the scene at dawn. A column of olive-drab trucks lined up as far as the eye could see. Engines coughed and roared to life. Drivers, weary but determined, adjusted their helmets, checked their fuel gauges, and tightened the straps on their loads. Each truck was loaded to the brim. Fuel drums stacked like metal soldiers. Boxes of rations tied down with rope. Crates of ammunition sealed with wax paper. The convoy commander raised his arm, and like a great beast awakening, the convoy lurched forward. Most of the men behind those wheels were barely in their 20s. Many had only weeks of training, and more than 75% of the drivers were African-American soldiers, men placed into segregated units, often overlooked, but now carrying the fate of Patton's army in their hands. They drove through the dust, through the night, through the fear of German attack. For them there was no glory parade, no front-page headlines, only the road. The pace was relentless. Convoys ran 24 hours a day. Trucks moved in a great loop, empty on the way back, fully loaded going forward. Drivers were ordered not to stop for anything. If a truck broke down, it was shoved off the road. If a driver fell asleep, someone else took the wheel. If a German sniper opened fire, the convoy pressed on. Lower voice, almost whisper. Stopping meant death, not just for the driver, but for the men waiting on the front lines for what he carried. Cinematic battlefield cutaway. On the German side, disbelief grew. A young Wehrmacht soldier, crouched in the hedgerows near Chartres, watched through field glasses as convoy after convoy thundered past. He muttered to his sergeant, "It does not end. There are always more trucks, always more gasoline." His sergeant, hardened by years of war, shook his head. For every fuel barrel the Germans captured, the Americans seemed to send 10 more. To the Germans, this was not just supply, it was magic, a logistical power they could not match. Their own armies crawled forward on dwindling reserves, each day more crippled by shortages. But the Americans, they had created a highway of war, an unending torrent of steel and rubber. For the drivers, though, it was not magic. It was sweat. It was exhaustion. It was the endless rattle of engines and the ache in their backs from 12, 14, even 16 hours behind the wheel. And yet, they pressed on, because every driver knew, without him, Patton's tanks would run dry. Without him, the Allied advance might stall. Without him, the war could drag on for months, perhaps years longer. And so, the Red Ball Express rolled on. Convoy after convoy, mile after mile. German soldiers stared in disbelief. American GIs at the front cheered when the trucks arrived, ripping open crates, siphoning gasoline, loading artillery shells into waiting guns. The lifeline held, and the Red Ball Express became more than just trucks. It became a symbol of unstoppable momentum. But ahead lay greater challenges. Longer routes, harsher weather, and German counterattacks determined to choke this ruling artery of war. The question was simple. Could the Red Ball Express keep up? Or would the tide of supplies finally break against the limits of men and machines? By September 1944, the Red Ball Express had become the beating heart of the Allied advance. But with every mile forward, the lifeline stretched thinner. The further Patton and his men pushed, the longer the convoys had to drive. What once had been a 200-mile round trip now crept toward 500. The drivers felt it, the trucks felt it, and so did the Germans. The roads were a nightmare, narrow, winding, often little more than country lanes. Bridges strained under the constant pounding of heavy loads. Dust coated everything. Engines, uniforms, even lungs. In the rain, dust turned to muck. Tires sank deep into ruts. Mud splattering across windshields. Drivers hunched forward, peering through streaked glass, their knuckles white around the wheel. Every moment carried risk. There were accidents. Trucks collided in the night when headlights failed. Others overturned on sharp curves, spilling barrels and boxes across the ditches. And then there was the enemy. German planes, though fewer now, still prowled the skies. Focke-Wulfs swooped low, their cannons spitting fire into the convoys. Drivers hit the gas, pushing their engines beyond red line. Some trucks burst into flames, some men never made it home. Yet the convoys rolled on. One driver later recalled, "We had no weapons but the wheel. Our cargo was our gun, our fuel was our ammunition. If we failed, the men at the front would die." For many of these men, especially the African-American drivers who carried the bulk of the burden, this was their war. Not in foxholes, not with rifles, but on the endless road, behind the wheel, with courage measured not in medals, but in miles. The statistics were staggering. In just 3 months, from August to November 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies. Think about that. 400,000 tons. Enough to feed, fuel, and arm entire armies. Day after day, night after night, without pause. For the German High Command, it was maddening. Reports filtered in. The Americans are moving entire divisions as if they float upon gasoline. They have an endless supply. Officers studied their maps, their logistics charts, their fuel reserves. The numbers did not add up. How could an enemy move so far, so fast, with such consistency? The truth was rumbling down French roads, painted in dust and exhaust smoke. The Red Ball Express. But even miracles have limits. As autumn deepened, problems mounted. Engines wore out, tires shredded, spare parts ran low. Fuel meant for tanks sometimes had to be burned just to keep the trucks moving. And then came the weather. Cold rain swept across France, chilling drivers to the bone. The mud grew worse. Fog cloaked the roads, forcing convoys to creep at walking pace. Yet still they drove. Imagine being 19 years old. It's 3 in the morning. You've been awake for 18 hours. Your truck rattles and groans, threatening to quit at any moment. You haven't eaten since yesterday. Your stomach gnaws with hunger. And outside the darkened cab, you know German patrols could be waiting in the tree line. You grip the wheel tighter. You press the gas. Because if you stop, if you falter, a tank crew with the front may run out of shells. A rifleman may go without food. The war may grind to a halt. The Red Ball drivers carried this weight in silence. Few spoke of it. Few were recognized for it. But without them, the front line would have collapsed. By late 1944, the strain was reaching a breaking point. Even Eisenhower himself worried. Could the supply lines keep up? The German army, though battered, was not finished. They were planning a desperate counterattack, and they knew if they could choke the Red Ball Express, they might strangle the Allied advance. The test of the Red Ball Express was about to come. December 1944. The Ardennes. The war, many thought, was nearing its end. The Allies had liberated Paris, driven the Germans back across France, and now pressed toward the very borders of the Reich. Some soldiers dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they would be home by Christmas. But Hitler had one last card to play, a massive counter-offensive. The Germans struck through the Ardennes forest with tanks, artillery, and desperate fury. It would become the Battle of the Bulge, the largest battle the U.S. Army would ever fight. And in those freezing woods, fuel, food, and ammunition would once again decide the fate of nations. The German plan hinged on one thing: starve the Allies of fuel. Without gasoline, Patton's tanks could not move. Without ammunition, American rifles would fall silent. Without supplies, the front would crumble. So the German High Command prayed for one miracle, that the endless flow of the Red Ball Express might finally break. The Ardennes was a nightmare for the convoys. Snow blanketed the roads. Ice slicked every curve, turning each hill into a death trap. Trucks skidded, slid sideways, jackknifed into ditches. Engines groaned in the cold. Batteries froze. Tires cracked in the bitter air. Drivers wore every scrap of clothing they owned: coats, scarves, gloves, even blankets. Yet still their breath hung in frosty clouds before their faces. And yet, through that bitter winter, the trucks rolled on. Convoys snaked through the white forests like iron arteries, carrying lifeblood to the front. Sometimes headlights cut faint beams through the fog. Other times, in blackout conditions, they drove in near darkness, each man following only the glow of the truck ahead. One driver later remembered, "The road was black ice. You didn't steer, you prayed. But stopping wasn't an option. If we stopped, the line would starve." German soldiers watched in disbelief once more. They had expected the American advance to collapse under the strain. Instead, the convoys only grew larger. Even as artillery thundered in the distance, even as shells burst on the horizon, even as the German counterattack threatened to split the Allied front in two, the Red Ball Express refused to break. Think of it. At the very moment Hitler gambled everything, when German panzers surged through the Ardennes, when Allied troops were surrounded at Bastogne, when supply lines should have snapped, the Red Ball drivers kept driving. They brought fuel for Patton's tanks, ammunition for the howitzers, food for the frozen soldiers holding the line. Every truck that made it through meant another day of survival.
And when Patton turned his Third Army north to relieve Bastogne, it was the Red Ball Express that gave him the fuel to move. Patton himself would later admit, "My tanks could not have turned without the Red Ball." It is easy to picture war as the clash of generals, the roar of artillery, the thunder of tanks. But behind every shell fired, behind every tank that surged forward, was a truck driver on some frozen road, alone in the night. He may have been 19. He may have been black, serving in a segregated unit. He may have been tired, hungry, and scared. But he drove. And by driving, he carried victory on his shoulders. The Red Ball Express endured the Ardennes. It endured the Bulge. It endured the last desperate fury of the Reich. And when the snows melted, the road to Germany lay open. The convoys would roll on, mile after mile, until the Allies crossed the Rhine and marched to final victory. And still, German soldiers whispered in disbelief, "How do they keep coming? How do they never stop?"
By the spring of 1945, the Red Ball Express had done its duty. The roads of France and Belgium were scarred with tire tracks, the ditches littered with rusted wrecks of trucks that never made it home. But the lifeline had held. The Red Ball Express was disbanded in November 1944, once railroads and pipelines had caught up to the front. Yet its legacy rolled on, in every victory the Allies achieved, in every town liberated, in every soldier kept alive because the fuel, the food, and the ammunition arrived just in time. The drivers did not wear medals on their chests. Their names did not headline newspapers. Most returned to quiet lives, their heroism largely unspoken. But history remembers. More than 23,000 truck drivers, most of them young, most of them African American, kept Patton's army alive. They fought not with rifles, but with wheels, engines, and grit. German officers, hardened veterans of years of war, admitted they could not comprehend it. How could an enemy move with such relentless speed? How could the Americans feed their advance with unending gasoline and ammunition? The answer was simple: the Red Ball Express. So when we speak of D-Day, when we speak of Patton's tanks, when we speak of Bastogne, let us also remember the nameless drivers who braved night and ice and fire so that freedom could roll forward. Their engines have long fallen silent, but their road carries on. And that, my friends, is the story of the Red Ball Express, the unsung lifeline of the Allied advance.
the convoys that stunned the Germans and kept America rolling toward victory. If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten roads of World War II, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others who love history. Every subscription, every like, every share helps keep these stories alive. Stories of sacrifice, courage, and the men and women who carried the weight of freedom. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep the past alive.